Hey, how do you feel about some high rarity cards, or maybe some foreign ones, or maybe be ahead of the game with others by preparing for future set releases with very quick shipping? Check out EJ Gaming and use code British5 on checkout for 5% off on all your orders. Link in the description.
Greetings, Lewis, and welcome to another video. This past weekend was YCS Richmond, which is our third YCS with Age of Overlord being legal, and our second YCS in North America. This one was attended by roughly 1,500 players, which meant 11 rounds of Swiss and then top 32 cut elimination. Normally, I would do a thorough analysis and recap on the previous YCS right before this one. However, with very limited information and time that I had available regarding YCS Bolivia, I won't be doing that like as thorough as it should be. What I'll be doing instead is giving you a short recap of the actual meta trends that has happened in our competitive format after the actual successful release of Age of Overlord. So I'm going to start with part one, which is the domination of Rescuers. YCS Indianapolis took place right when Age of Overlord got released at the very same weekend, and with very limited time for most players to prepare. Rescuers was a deck that really bolstered a competitive edge. A lot of people who were familiar with the strategy and have already practiced with the deck pretty much had the upper hand, because not many people that were testing probably were as prepared for it. We already established the Rescue Ace is one of the better decks this format, because it is one of the decks that can use their engine the best against a wide array of different strategies. So now we go to part two, which is Mikanko. YCS Bolivia was this past weekend, not this past weekend, which is Richmond, but the weekend prior to that. And despite not knowing how much like representation or not having enough coverage of the decks or strategies that were doing super well at the event, we know that Mikanko was a strategy that pretty much won that event. Probably not many people have noticed it, but now every single strategy from Amazing Defenders all have a YCS winning record. Purely was the first one during YCS Sao Paulo, then Rescue Ace in Indianapolis, and now Mikanko in Bolivia. Exactly what happened to Mikanko that made them very valuable this format? So the thing to take note of is that the Sinful Spoils engine really helps this deck. It gives them like the ability to summon Renaud, not only summon Renaud but summon like the Fireflint Lady, which are really good extenders that really just bolster the strategy. The release of Gen and Ken also really helped this deck. It gives them a very solid win condition if they go first, which is summoning Acid Golem and just shifting it to the opponent's zone, and pretty much just put your opponent on better have like an out. Otherwise, you're just going to like win the duel in the very next turn. And another really strong thing about this deck is that this monster right here, the Jewel Mikanko, if this monster ends up getting summoned on board, it's really hard to stop like the other Mikanko effects. Like the Mikankos themselves already have battle protection. The equipped spells give them destruction protection, and the Hewley gives them targeting protection. Not many decks have enough tools to just handle like a great array of mass protection like that on a bunch of different monsters with just like their standard level of removal. Another thing about this deck that just made it very strong is like it's really strong going second as well. It doesn't need to play a lot of non-engine. We see here that they're playing Change of Heart in the main deck as well as Nibiru. The main reason they're playing these cards is because of the Gen and Ken. combination. However, if you end up actually going second, you have a lot of really strong cards that just work well for you if you actually go second. Like you have Thrust, Talents, Change of Heart, Durandal, Nibiru, just to mention like one or two things. This deck can also OTK. This deck can also summon like SP Little Knight very, very efficiently. This is another Isolde deck. I will talk about Isolde a little bit later on. However, like, yeah, like, overall, this deck had a very, very strong competitive edge. And moving forward, I think that if you're going to be prepared for meta contenders this format, you should also be preparing for Mikanko. Okay, so things to look forward to before Richmond. We see that all amazing defender strategies are viable options after all of them having YCS winning titles. But besides those, we also have Tier Elements, Unchained, Vanadium, just to mention like three other really, really strong options that have consistently been topping these past events. Then you have lesser known ones, like for example Fluonderies, Dragons, Labyrinth, Vanquish Soul, Rika Plants, just to name one or two. So we all know that though all of those decks are like actual contenders that you kind of have to like take note of. But yeah, like moving forward, those are like the kind of decks that you kind of have to prepare yourself for if you're going to this next event. Now, what exactly happened when we talk about Richmond? So, first, I'm going to give props to Konami. Like, they did a very, very thorough blog. Like, they have a lot of coverage. Like, they even have a table of contents that just shows you like a lot of stuff that happened, like all the written feature matches, like stuff that happened with the giant cards, with the side events, like the full deck breakdown. Like we don't see this a lot when it comes to like Konami in general. So I'll give them the hats on this because this is very, very thorough. So watching this event, like I brought up prior, it is roughly around 1,500 players, just shy by 6. And the most represented deck was Rescue Ace. This comes to no surprise after their very strong performance at like Indianapolis. A lot of people just bolstered themselves into like being convinced that this is a very, very strong strategy, and like it's just one of the very most safe picks for this event because of their wide array of matchups and like their versatility with their engine. Then we have Purely. Purely is a deck that has a very, very competitive edge. Like against Rescue Ace, they have like the Purely Street, which is like one very, very strong card in their arsenal, which is part of their engine. It also very strong against a lot of strategies, going first or second. And out of every single deck in the room, it is the most consistent. Like, it is the one that plays the most out of its engine. Is the one that has the most amount of starters. Is the one that can fit a really good amount of non-engine. So, Purely at the very end of the day was a very, very strong option. Tier Elements, also no surprise here. I think until Konami addresses the Chizu cards, this is just one of the more stronger decks this format when it comes to like high rolling with like their ceiling. We then have Unchained, Vanadium. Those are other two popular decks. They've also been doing very well as of late. Labyrinth, I will get to this in a moment afterwards. But yeah, Labyrinth had a very good showing. Then you see like the other aforementioned decks that I gave example for. We see that Chimera has a very, very limited amount of players. And that will reflect upon Top Cut as well. So overall, like watching this event, if you're playing on day one, the most you should be seeing are Rescue Ace players. So if you are already a Rescue Ace player yourself, or you're already familiar with the matchup, that should be favorable for you. Same thing with purely in tournaments. So you notice that there are no Mikonkos here. Apparently, so according to like the article itself, it says that less than 20 duelists at this event were playing the Mikanko deck, which is a fair assessment because despite its very strong like record in the last YCS, probably not many people are familiar with the deck. Not many people have enough testing with it. Maybe people who do have good testing with it have already figured out that it has a couple of choke points. So it kind of makes sense why they're not as represented. But you will see later when it comes to Top Cut that it did make a showing. Okay, so let's look what happened at the Top Cut. After 11 rounds of Swiss and being on second day, we see that Unchained gathered the most Top Cuts spots on top 32 with 8 out of 32 spots. Followed by Tier Limits, which has 5 spots. Then Rescue Ace, which has 4. And then right after Rescue Ace, we have Labyrinth, that has 3. Purely, that also has 3. Sinful Spoils Infernoble, I will get that in a moment, which is split with Infernoble and Sinful Spoils Infernoble Mikanko. So if you pair all these 3 together, they're tied for 3rd place alongside Rescue Ace. And then you have Kashtira, Horus Tier, Salamangreat, I will talk about this, Vanadium, and Mikanko. Notice how I mentioned there were less than 20 Mikanko players playing at this event, and 2 of them topped. That's a really strong conversion rate. That goes to show you that Mikanko is actually a really viable strategy this format. And like not only that, but like we see here that one of the 2 Mikanko players even made top 16. I will get to top 16 in a moment. So yeah, I kind of wanted to bring up Mikanko first because I think not enough people respected the deck, and that warranted like their 2 spots in Top Cut. We see that Vanadium had a little bit of a fallback. I think what happened with Vanadium is that a lot of people like anticipated the matchup. They're respecting the deck a lot more now, meaning that you're going to see a lot of silver bullet cards like Droll and Lockbird, Mistaken Arrest, like Nibiru, and a plethora of other different cards that really just counter the strategy, like being played in the main deck, or at least in the side deck, at really good volume. Horus Tier Element, that's pretty much another Tier Element deck, so it's pretty much just 5 Tier Element decks in Top Cut, if I'm not mistaken, counting the Horus one. So I'm still not familiar. I'm not a fan rather of the Horus engine in Tier Elements. I'm still not fully convinced that's like the best way to play it. However, it did perform very well at this YCS, and there is a little bit of garner of respect that should be given when it comes to like the Horus cards. Shoutouts to Justin Singh. He was the Horus player. For those who don't remember who that is the guy who lost to Exodia at the Indianapolis YCS. Basically, he just came back with a vengeance and just even made the top 8 with the Horus Tier Element deck, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, here it is. Kashtira. So, despite a Rise Heart like being on the forbidden list, this deck still has its full arsenal like available, and that just goes to show you that like in a right setting, if you have the right tools and cards to just handle like your appropriate matchups. Kashtira can just really do well this format. Like, it's the best deck that can play Dimension Shifter at the moment, right next to Flonderies. And Dimension Shifter is just a card that really just wipes out almost every single deck that made Top Cut. Like, at least takes away a turn from them. The deck can play a good amount of non-engine. The deck can play a good amount of floodgates. So we won't see Kashtira like dominating any event anytime soon, but it's not going to be unorthodox if you do see it in Top Cut every once in a while. So I want to talk about Salamangreat. I will make a separate video talk about Salamangreat, because not only did Salamangreat do well at this YCS, it also did well at the UK Open, and is actually performing a lot better now in Master Duel and in the OCG. And I kind of want to make a very in-depth, like, dedicated video on Salamangreat, because I feel like moving forward, that's going to be like the best Cybers deck that we're going to have in the upcoming format. So, but yeah, basically the Salamangreat player was playing 3 copies of Fire Recovery in his main deck, which is a really good card for fire decks in general. Outside of that, there's not like many things that stood out when it comes to that deck in general. It is a deck that's still weak to Nibiru, which is a popular hand trap. It is a deck that is weak to draw. It does have not the highest ceiling, but it can play a good amount of non-engine. It can play a good amount of cards that just help with their engine. It can play a lot of really good side cards that are good this format. For example, Goes and Mash and Rivalry. Overall, strong contender. Their Salamangreat are great again. Mic drop. Okay, now I want to talk about Labyrinth. So, as we see here, Labyrinth took 4 spots in top 32. And I think it was 3 to 4 spots. At least 3. And the thing about it is, like, Labyrinth has a really strong Rescue Ace matchup. If you've been on my channel and you've seen my deck profiles, I've spoken in depth about what I like about the Labyrinth strategy. My strategy was a hybrid with Unchained, but I feel like Labyrinth as a whole has a really strong Rescue Ace matchup. Well, not really strong, but has a fairly strong Rescue Ace matchup. The deck can play a lot of different trap cards. Arias is a really strong tool for the deck. Not the tool that the deck actually needed, not a tool that actually just bolsters the strategy, but it's just a strategy that is very adaptive to the format. And if people move away from cards that just counter Labyrinth outright, the deck is just going to keep doing well, because outside of Unchained, which is like their weakest matchup, and probably the reason why you don't see Labyrinth dominating like as well, like, Labyrinth can actually hold its own against every other deck. In the OCG, we see that Labyrinth is already like a top contender. I think after Maze of Millennium, when Transaction Rollback gets released, we're probably going to see Labyrinth a lot more than what we're seeing right now. But at the moment, I say Labyrinth is a very fair deck that you can take at an event if you are prepared for the other matchups. And in an environment where Rescue Ace is just going to be like very highly represented, Labyrinth is going to have a very strong shot, because their engine can play well into Unchained. Rescue Ace's current engine. Okay, let's talk about Infernoble. So, Infernoble Knights very performed well at this event. They pretty much outshined like super strongly. Like you see here on top 16, like there are 3 out of the 4 like total Infernoble decks, meaning that they're doing very very well like in transgression. And we see here that like not only did it make even top 8, but it even made top 4. Shoutouts to Pac. Basically, he was one of the main people that was holding in for a noble deck. He had 1 or 2 feature matches with the deck, and it showed like how much strong the deck can be played. Yeah. So what happened to Infernoble? Why did Infernoble do so well this event? I think that outside of every other deck in the room, Barry Manadium, Infernoble is one of the decks with the very very strong turn 1 if they like go first. Like they make a really really oppressive board. They can play through hand traps. They have like a very strong like resource gain. They can play a good amount of non-engine. Like if we see Pac's list, he's playing like 12 hand traps in the main, and he plays pretty much just all engine alongside that, outside of like a few outliers like Connector and the Sinful Spells package. So like as a whole, Infernobles was very very strong at this event. It pretty much goes at the same route that Mikanko does, where like if you're not familiar with the matchup, they're just going to like take away a few spots. This card right here, the Angelica's Angelic Ring, this card is really really strong in this deck. Like it pretty much makes it so like the main counters to the strategy, like Super Polymerization and Dark Ruler No More, are way less problematic for them. It also means that if you don't have a solid way for breaking their actual current board, you are just going to get like out resourced and out grinded and just OTK'd. So yeah, I say moving forward, Infernobles are going to be way more respected now. The deck is weak to draw. The deck is weak to like a bunch of interruptions. It is sort of a glass cannon deck. It's not super optimal if it doesn't go first, which is something that Pac pointed out when he had his feature matches. But as a whole, if you're going to play in a format where you kind of want to play against a bunch of different strategies and you cannot prepare yourself for every single one and you just want a competitive edge, then Infernoble is a very very strong pick, barring you win enough dice rolls. So let's talk about Unchained. So as you guys saw, not only did Unchained like dominated Top Cut, but like we see here that Unchained really really just outperformed. The finals was an Unchained mirror match. So now it bears the question: is Unchained actually the best deck, or what actually happened? So let's look at the first place list. We see that it's 43 cards. We see that it's placed the DVD package, but if we talk about non-engine, we see Ash, Valor. We see in the side deck, we see like Droll, DD Crow. We see like Mistaken Arrest, which is a very 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 strong card. We see Phantasme. We see the second place list. We see that they're on Spooky Dogwood. I wonder that's what. I think this is a really really strong card against tier elements. 3 Droll, 3 Druis, another really strong card against tier elements. Yeah, they're playing Disaster, which is very strong. If against the mirror match, we see this one did not play the DDD package. They opted for Nibiru and Imperm instead. So if we take into consideration like all the decks in the room and like all the matchups for Unchained, the only really bad matchup for Unchained like that we see in the entire like scope of Top Cut is tier elements. Like against all the other actual strategies, Unchained is really not that bad against all of them. Like you can make the argument for like Mikanko and for like Rescue Ace and maybe Infernoble, but like Unchained is very strong going first, it's a very strong going second, it can play a good amount of non-engine, and the most important part about Unchained, and the reason why I feel like they did so well this event, is the deck that is most resilient to the actual counters to the other competitive decks. If we're in a format where Vanadium, Purely, Mikanko, and Infernobles are going to do very very well, then people are going to be very afraid of those decks because those decks really have a really high ceiling. Therefore, they're going to be like dedicating most of their counters for those strategies, which means that Unchained is just going to take a foothold because many of the really strong counters against the high combo decks are not really that strong against Unchained. Another thing that Unchained is good for, like when it comes to this format, is the deck is super super adaptive. It can play a lot of non-engine. It can play a lot of cards that really work on their favor. Like for example, Mistaken Arrest is a really really strong card, and only Unchained is like one of the higher decks here in this entire like pie chart that can actually play the card. The other being like Labyrinth. The Labyrinth matchup is already strong for Unchained, so they don't really have to worry about that. Against like rogue decks, Unchained is just very very strong as well. So yeah, overall, I'd say it was very well deserved for Unchained to win like this event. And it's kind of ironic to just bring up Unchained winning because prior to like Age of Overlord, a lot of people were afraid of like respecting Unchained at the same level it would have been prior to Age of Overlord, because out of every single deck that like topped this event, this is the deck that had the least amount of support from Age of Overlord, which just goes to show you just how adaptive the deck can be. And if we look at the future, like Valiant Smashers arrives in roughly 2 weeks, so that's going to introduce the Centurion archetype as well as the Mementolians and the Valmonica. I don't think Unchained struggles against any of those decks. The month after that, we have Fire Kings, the structure deck. Unchained also doesn't struggle against that deck either. Then we'll have Phantom Nightmare, like on February. We'll have like Mason Millennium, which is going to be helping out Labyrinth a lot, which is also not that bad against Unchained. So unless Konami actually does something about that deck, I think for the next couple months, Unchained are still going to be very very strong this format, and it might even end up just being the most strongest deck in the format as a whole. Right now, Rescue Ace is very very strong, like when it comes to like their non-engine and like their deck like as a whole. But if we look at like participation and transition into Top Cut, Rescue Ace didn't do so well. And I think something that takes precedent is that Rescue Ace is a really, really strong deck. I'll go as far to say the deck is stronger than Unchained when it comes to their engine, but the deck is way less consistent. And consistency is key when it comes to like their performance. Tier Elements is way stronger against Unchained, but again, the deck is not as consistent and cannot play as many blowouts against the current format as Unchained can. But yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to like my coverage for YCS Richmond. I hope you found this video informative. I hope you found this to your understanding and your liking. More content involving this format coming soon. Keep practicing and keep dueling.